Can I be heard? Yes? Okay. Welcome. Welcome to worship. It's good to see folks sitting in chairs, and it's good to know that there are more folks out in internet land who are joining us, and that's a good thing. First, for the people out there, sign in. Let us know that you're with us, and when we do our names and other things, we'll make sure you're included. If you have prayer concerns or if you have celebrations, sign in those as well, and we can include them. And then we will be celebrating the Lord's Supper communion at the end of the service, and if you're at home and would like to join us, gather bread or crackers and wine or juice and have those ready after a little bit. So, welcome. We are going to open with a reading from Psalms. This is from Psalm 73. The psalmist is addressing God. When my soul was embittered, when I was pricked in heart, I was stupid and ignorant. I was like a brute beast toward you. Nevertheless, I am continually with you. You hold my right hand. You guide me with your counsel, and afterwards you receive me with honor. Whom have I in heaven but you? And there is nothing on earth that I desire other than you. My flesh and my heart may fail, but God is the strength of my heart and my portion forever. We're going to sing, and we're going to sing a morning song. It's the beginning of our worship. It's not morning, but sort of transpose yourself a little bit. We're singing for the beginning of worship as if it were morning, I guess. The song sheet is on your seat. When Morning Gilds the Skies. So, again, welcome. As we gather, we will do as is our custom, and we can do so much better now. Those of us who are here will say our names, and we'll say them nice and loud because this is the microphone for everybody out there, and then we will also welcome the people out there. So, I'm Jean.
Bill.
Jen. Gail. I'm Susan.
Jill.
Karen.
Laura.
Jane.
Nils.
Helen.
Philip. John.
All right, and We know that we're missing Darlene because she has, well, no, I'm not going to spoil the surprise. And Helen is also with us. So Darlene and Helen are both with us online. So, celebrations, birthdays. Everybody's fingers are pointing to Susan. Susan Steinkamp's birthday is on Friday. And the surprise is that Darlene, even though she's not here, has sent a cake. So it's not really a surprise. So, is there anybody here who could start us singing?
Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear Susan. Happy birthday to you.
Now, other birthdays or anniversaries that I don't know about? No. Okay. All right. I did this a number of weeks ago. I'm going to do this again. Tonight, another set of thoughts inspired by a Sunday school lesson. So, this time, we have a story called by one commentator a stumbling block to modern Christians. Here it is, from Matthew 14. Immediately, Jesus made the disciples get into the boat and go on ahead to the other side, while he dismissed the crowds. And after he had dismissed the crowds, he went up the mountain by himself to pray. When evening came, he was there alone. But by this time, the boat, battered by the waves, was far from the land, for the wind was against them. And early in the morning, he came walking toward them on the lake. But when the disciples saw him walking on the lake, they were terrified, saying, "It is a ghost." And they cried out in fear. But immediately Jesus spoke to them and said, "Take heart, it is I. Do not be afraid." Peter answered him, "Lord, if it is you, command me to come to you on the water." He said, "Come." So Peter got out of the boat, started walking on the water, and came toward Jesus. But when he noticed the strong wind, he became frightened. And beginning to sink, he cried out, "Lord, save me." Jesus immediately reached out his hand and caught him, saying to him, "You of little faith, why did you doubt?" When they got into the boat, the wind ceased, and those in the boat worshiped him, saying, "Truly, you are the Son of God." So, when a story starts out with immediately, you kind of know there's some setup, right? How am I doing? I guess I'm all right. Earlier, this is from chapter 14, earlier in chapter 14, Jesus has been told about the death of John the Baptist, who was executed by Herod Antipas, the ruler of Galilee. This apparently had happened some time previous, but the event hadn't been described, and Jesus hadn't known about it until now, the beginning of chapter 14. You know John, a fellow itinerant preacher of God, but more than that, in some places, he is called the forerunner. John proclaimed Jesus to be the fulfillment of scriptural prophecies of a Messiah to come. And John was Jesus' cousin and the one who baptized him. So we should not be surprised to read, when Jesus heard this, he withdrew from there in a boat to a deserted place by himself. Matthew doesn't tell us here what Jesus did in that deserted place, but we might reasonably imagine that he went away to mourn and to pray in private. But it was not to be. Crowds of people heard about him and his attempted retreat, and they followed him to his deserted place on the shore of the Sea of Galilee. And when Jesus saw the huge crowd that had gathered, Matthew tells us, he had compassion on them and cured their sick. He may have spent most of the day doing that, And by evening, we can imagine that he was tired and still hadn't had a chance to grieve the death of his cousin. The disciples urged him to send the crowds away to get their own dinners, but Jesus declined to do that. And what follows then is the story of Jesus and the disciples feeding 5,000 men, plus women and children, with 5 loaves and 2 fish. Another story commentator Douglas Hare calls a stumbling block to modern Christians. Finally, after the crowds had been fed, Matthew tells us, Jesus sent the disciples away, told them to get in their boat, cross to the other side of the lake, implying that he would join them later. And then, as we heard, Jesus also went away by himself, more successfully this time, up the mountain to pray. The Sea of Galilee is fed by the Jordan River from the north and drains through the continuing Jordan River toward the Dead Sea to the south. The Jordan Rift Valley, including the Sea of Galilee, lies between mountains. The Golan Heights to the east and Mount Arbel on the west, and these mountains fall fairly steeply into the sea. So, Jesus would not have had to go far from the shore to get up the mountain. And Jesus tells us Matthew was there alone praying. And the disciples had set out in their boat away from the land, but it was not going to be an easy trip for them to the other side of the lake. The boat was being battered, even tortured by waves, and the wind was against them. So the disciples were apparently not making great headway. In Mark's telling of the story, he says they were straining at the oars. This is not the only story of a violent storm on the Sea of Galilee. Apparently, they were not uncommon. Those mountains on either side of the lake were cut by clefts, valleys of their own, and the wind, especially a cool mountain wind, would rush down the sides of the mountain, funneled through those clefts and across the warmer water of the sea, and the resulting turbulence would stir up high waves. All of it a sudden and dangerous threat to any boat on the water. So, the disciples' boat was being battered and the wind was against them, and the disciples were in trouble. Then Jesus, after spending much of the night in the mountains in prayer, came down to the water and walked toward the disciples in the boat. It was early in the morning, not yet fully light, maybe still mostly dark, and the disciples saw a figure on the water, walking on the water, and they were terrified. And they could only think that they must be seeing a ghost. And they cried out in their fear. Jesus had certainly not meant to frighten them. He surely meant to help them. He reassured them. "Take heart," he said. "Take courage. Do not be afraid. It is I." This is where commentator Douglas Hare suggests that this story, like the one before it about feeding those thousands of people with 5 loaves and a fish, is a stumbling block to modern Christians. I expect we know what he means. This story is just not reasonable. It's not logical. It's not likely as it's told. At the time that it was first told, people who believed that God had brought about the Exodus through the Red Sea might have also believed that God could empower Jesus to walk on water. But for us moderns, it's a tougher sell. Some folks discount the story altogether and don't deal with it at all. Others seek alternative explanations. Jesus was actually walking through a shallow, marshy part of the sea, not really on top of the water. Or the disciples were so fatigued by their hours-long fight with the wind and waves that they were hallucinating. Or the jokesters among us have suggested that Jesus knew where the rocks were just under the surface of the water. Hare, the commentator, recommends that the best approach is to set aside the question of the historicity, the accuracy, historical truth of the event, and to focus instead on what this narrative meant to Matthew. So, what might Matthew have meant to convey by telling this story? What might he have wanted his hearers to learn or to take away from it? One important goal of Matthew in his gospel seems to have been to demonstrate that the man Jesus was the fulfillment of the prophecy in what we call the Old Testament, the prophecy that foretold the coming of a Messiah of God. For Matthew, Jesus was a miracle worker, endowed by God with supernatural power, and his miracles were evidence. They served to confirm that Jesus' teachings were true and that he was the Son of God. Commentator Hare suggests if Jesus walked on water, it was not because he was God or even divine, but because God empowered him to do so as a sign. And in the next scene, God empowered Peter to walk on water too. So what about that next scene? A part of this story that only Matthew tells. Although other gospel writers tell about the storm and about the disciples seeing Jesus walk on water, only Matthew tells the part about Peter. Somebody has written a book called Peter the Pebble, Peter the Rock. She might also have included in her title, Peter the Impulsive. This is typical Peter. As soon as Jesus has identified himself, Peter put himself forward, essentially saying, "Me too, me too," like a 4-year-old who wants to climb into the high branches of the tree just because his older brother can. Or like a 3-year-old who wants to pour her own milk out of the carton because her older sister can. Peter wanted to walk on water because Jesus was. He certainly had enthusiasm for it and confidence, maybe a reckless confidence, but all the evidence suggests that Peter really believed if Jesus called him to walk on water, he would be able to walk on water. And he could. He did. God empowered Peter to walk on water, and he did it. Then, like a kid wobbling down the street on his first bike ride without training wheels, he looked around and suddenly realized he was doing a spectacular thing, defying gravity, if you will, and in his self-consciousness, he became afraid and fell. Peter, like the bike-riding child, cried out, "Help me!" And Jesus, like the parent who reaches out and grabs the child's hand before she can fully hit the pavement, Jesus reached out and caught Peter and helped him into the boat. In the midst of the rescue, Matthew tells us, Jesus said to Peter, "You of little faith, why did you doubt?" Now, Matthew doesn't describe Jesus' face. We can't hear the tone of Jesus' voice. Was he criticizing, scolding, shaming? Was he like a parent saying to the bike-riding child, "Son, you're never going to be any good at anything unless you stop being a fraidy cat and keep your mind on what you're doing"? Or was Jesus like a parent saying to the new bike rider, "Honey, there's no reason to be scared. You can do this, and I'll be right here if you need me"? Those of us who live in a judging world, feeling judged by family, church, and society, and being quick to judge others ourselves, are likely to hear Jesus' words as criticism or judgment and know that we will never measure up. But those of us who strive to live in a kinder, more affirming world can hear Jesus putting the emphasis on his last few words rather than the first few. We can hear Jesus asking what reason we have to doubt him or God, and we can learn to trust their care for us even when we are impulsive, foolish, jumping in over our heads. This Peter is so much like we often are, enthusiastic to the point of folly, well-meaning but not always prudent. And this Jesus is what we so often need: an ally and champion, a ready friend, a strong and generous rescuer. Jesus left his mountain of prayer to rescue the disciples in the boat. Maybe he knew he could calm the storm. Maybe he figured another pair of arms at the oars could move the boat against the wind. In any case, calming, rescuing, and saving are what Jesus was all about. And when Peter's faith, short-lived to be sure, but it was faith that caused and allowed him to jump from the boat into the water in the first place, when Peter's faith was undermined by real danger, when fear and doubt took over, when Peter needed Jesus the most, Jesus reached out and rescued him. That's not quite the end of the story. Matthew tells us that when Jesus and Peter got into the boat and the wind had ceased, the disciples in the boat worshiped Jesus, saying, "Truly, you are the Son of God." And surely, this is one of the things Matthew wanted his hearers to take away from the story. In fact, from his whole gospel, that Jesus is the Son of God. Peter declared it in the next chapter, and Roman soldiers said it as well at the foot of the cross. God empowered Jesus to do miraculous things as evidence of Jesus' relationship to God, his calling, his fulfilling of the prophecies of a Messiah. In Mark's telling of this story, the disciples are astounded but clueless. In John, we get nothing but the facts. The disciples saw Jesus walking on the water. He said, "Don't be afraid," and the boat reached land. End of story. But Matthew wanted hearers to take away more, a lesson, and he made that lesson clear. The disciples called Jesus the Son of God. But I suggest, with the support of some commentators, that Matthew's story within the story also has a message for it. It's not just about Jesus walking on water or his calming the storm. It's not even just about his being the Son of God. It's about how Jesus is the Son of God, how we can know it and trust it. Jesus, the Son of God, came from the mountains to give help to his followers who were facing a storm that was too big for them to manage. A literal storm, but also the storms of life that upend us. A death, the end of a relationship or a job, too much to do, and the exhaustion that comes with it. A crisis or a danger that worries us or terrifies us. Jesus will come to us in the midst of such a storm to say, "Take heart, do not be afraid, it is I." Jesus, the Son of God, will even help us when we may not entirely deserve it, when we've bitten off more than we can chew and are choking on it, when we've jumped into something without looking and find ourselves in over our head, when we've assumed we have knowledge, insight, or skill that we don't and are at a loss for how to proceed. And Jesus, the Son of God, responds to the little faith or the short-lived faith we have, maybe wishing it were more, but not begrudging us the help we seek, even when our doubts crowd in and undermine our confidence in him. Jesus, the Son of God, reaches out his hand and catches us and leads us back to a calm place. We can be reassured not only that Jesus is somehow the Son of God, but also by how Jesus is the Son of God, and thus reveals God to us as compassionate, caring, and forgiving, even in the face of our foolishness, our impulsiveness, and our doubts. Amen. Natasha Hayes has joined us, and we are going to sing. Also on your sheet on your chair, Jesus Calls Us, or The Tumult. come now to a time for sharing gifts, and we pass the bowl for gifts that will fit in the bowl and support the work of Patchwork. But we also invite you to share gifts that have come into your life this week, gifts, blessings that are too big for the basket.
It's a major gift to have Emmy stand here for a while. Yes.
Emmy's visit with her, what?
Long awaited, couldn't wait till she got.
A long-awaited visit from Emmy is making Jane, and I think Neil's very happy. So, all right. Other gifts, blessings.
Well, to gather here caused both Paige and Rowan to be here for 3 days also, which was a nice surprise.
Paige and Rowan also visited. Okay, good.
Well, speaking of that, it was a gift that Jane and Rowan came and helped with some underwear and socks. Back to school sale.
Experienced help for the back-to-school sale. Very good. All right, we are richly blessed, and we give God thanks. And now we come to a time for prayers, and I will open our time of prayers. I invite you to become part of that. If you have prayers that you would like to lift up and share with the community, there'll be a space for that, and you can say those aloud and close with the words, "Gracious God," and we'll all respond, "Hear our prayer." Okay. Gracious, loving, and ever-listening God, we lift up in thanksgiving all the blessings we have named, as well as those we carry in our own hearts. Gracious God, hear our prayer. Hear our prayer. Hear us now as we lift up the prayers that are closest to us, either silently in our hearts or praying aloud.
I lift up my sister who's going to have a knee replacement tomorrow, and I wish her good health and good work today. Gracious God.
Hear our prayer. It's a prayer for Susan's sister who's going to have knee replacement surgery.
I lift up family member caregivers who struggle with the dual role of trying to balance being being caregiver while they still maintain the very special relationship of family member during some very challenging times. Gracious God.
Hear our prayer. Gail lifts up family members who have become also caregivers.
I lift up in thanksgiving the Evansville Rehabilitation Center. They're having their money bonathon today, and I give thanks for the generosity of people here in Evansville and this whole tri-state area that have contributed to helping the rehabilitation center that helps so many families. Gracious God.
Hear our prayer. Helen lifts up the Rehabilitation Center and today's phone-a-thon and the generosity of the Evansville and tri-state community.
I'd like to lift up our leaders in Washington who this week are going to try to actually pass an infrastructure bill, and it'll be tough, but let's pray for a miracle.
Jill asked us to pray for leaders in Washington trying to pass an infrastructure bill. Gracious God.
Hear our prayer. I lift up the victims of the flooding in Germany. I'm thankful that Amy's sister and her family have been relatively safe thus far, but prayers for all of those affected by the flooding.
John lifts up the people affected by the flooding in Germany and thanksgiving that Amy's sister and family are safe. Gracious God.
Hear our prayer.
All of these prayers, oh God, we lift, we lift up in your holy name. Amen. And we have the surprise blessing that Darlene has joined us. So that's and blue sky out the window. All right, very nice, very nice. Okay, now we come to this table, the Lord's table, the table of Jesus, the compassionate, rescuing Son of God, who invites us to share a meal of bread and drink with him, to strengthen our bodies and refresh our spirits and renew our confidence, to be rescued and brought to a calm place in the midst of the storms we face. Jesus invites us here in person or out there in time and space as he invited his disciples. When he took a loaf of bread and blessed it and broke it, saying, "Take, eat, this is my body given for you. Do this in remembrance of me." And then he took a cup and gave it to them, saying, "Drink from this, all of you. This is my blood of the covenant, given for the forgiveness of sins." Sharing this bread and this cup, we become God's beloved community, a community of thanksgiving and mutual support. And we remember Jesus, the Jesus who rescued an impulsive Peter, whose faith and doubt battled within him and got him in trouble. Our faith is that Jesus will do the same for us. These are the gifts of God for the people of God, and I invite the people here to come and receive bread, and we have wine in paper cups on a silver tray, juice in plastic cups on a blue tray, and we invite people at home to join us. Again, the gifts of God for the people of God. Bill, bread of life broken for you. Kayla, bread of life broken for you. John, bread of life broken for you. Jane, bread of life broken for you. Susan, bread of life broken for you. Jill, bread of life broken for you. Helen, bread of life broken for you. Phil, bread of life broken for you. Mills, bread of life broken for you. Emmy, bread of life broken for you. Jane, bread of life broken for you. Laura, bread of life broken for you. Karen, bread of life broken for you. Darlene, bread of life broken for you. We have these closing words from the prophet Isaiah. "But you, Israel, my servant, Jacob, whom I have chosen, the offspring of Abraham, my friend, you whom I took from the ends of the earth and called from its farthest corners, saying to you, you are my servant, I have chosen you and not cast you off. Do not fear, for I am with you. Do not be afraid, for I am your God. I will strengthen you. I will help you. I will uphold you with my victorious hand." Amen.
Amen.
And announcements.
Do we have a community meeting tonight?
We have a community meeting tonight. Sorry? Oh, board meeting on Tuesday?
And of course, the back-to-school sale is 2 weeks from yesterday. And I will say, though, that I don't know if Jane can corroborate this, but I tried to get back into that closet and could barely open the door where the underwear is. And I don't think we have much in the way of boys' underwear. So, yeah, very short. And so, and whatever. Yeah. So, Grace, if you are feeling like, urging other people to buy, I think it's boxers that really most young guys like.
I think I will take the keys and go back there and get it because it's a matter of some sizes that we're using to.
Yeah, if you can get into the closet, that would be.
I can get
Okay, that could. So anyway, so we need boxers, grades K through 5, and I did contact Aldersgate, and hopefully they're gonna focus on boys, but we'll see what happens.
Okay. Right? Okay, we're going to go away singing. Eternal Father, strong to save. I never knew this hymn until I came to Evansville, and Joe Baus liked to sing this hymn. I think he was a Navy guy, and so I think this spoke particularly to him, but it can speak to all of us tonight. And the people of God say, Amen. Amen.